morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study for today, Genesis 16. This is Hagar and Ishmael, or Ishmael. Not quite sure exactly how to pronounce it. Here we go. Everything, we check the bike out. Everything's okay, got gas. 5:05, I'm running a little late. So I'm going to have to drive a little fast. Let's go ahead and therefore let's go hop right on the expressway. A slightly different route then. This will allow us to get right on the freeway fast. We're going to have to move. So, this is Genesis 16. This is Hagar and Ishmael, as I said already. And my name is Kurt Bell. And this is Freeway Bible Study. I am a non-believer. That means I'm an atheist, of course. But I like to study, and I like to know things. I especially like to know the things that I don't think are true, because I don't want to continue to disbelieve if it turns out it's right. So I study the Bible every day, Monday through Friday, for exactly that purpose. So I'm working my way through from Genesis through Revelation, and this is not my first time through the Bible. This is a return visit, so to speak. Excuse me, sorry. So in this part of Genesis, we're still following the tale of Abram, who will soon be called Abraham, of course, and the father, the patriarch of Isaac, Jacob, and basically the progenitor of many nations, and also a person to whom God has his great covenant. And let's go ahead and we can move forward. There we go. Sorry, well, I'm kind of juggling my words a little bit. I'm trying to get myself settled, get onto the freeway. Let's do it. Got to get up to speed quick because we're coming onto the carpool lane where you need to be up to about between 70 and 80 miles an hour to get in with the flow. People get upset at you otherwise. And we can stay in the carpool lane for maybe 4 miles before we switch onto the 55. This is the 5 freeway north. We're going to switch onto the 55, which also goes north, but that can't be possible because it's a different direction, but I've never figured that out. Okay, so to date now, Abram has adventured in Egypt, and he's got Lot with him, and he's back in the land of Canaan, which is they're his relatives, but a lot of them are kind of, what would that be? Not heathens, not barbarians, but is it Gentiles? I'm not sure. They follow another god, the god Baal. It's actually a part of a pantheon of gods. But some of them obviously follow the one true God, because we see in a previous chapter how Abram gives a reward to one of the kings who happens to be a priest of the Lord. So, but anyway, things have gone well. I don't want to linger too much on the past. Let's get to the present. Things have gone well, and Lot is well established in Sodom, and Abram is well established to the south, further down in Canaan, with some friends he's got, a king, and they've done very well for themselves in a large household, lots of slaves. Now, no children. Abram doesn't have any kids. His wife Sarai has been barren, or as she would say, she has been restrained by the Lord from having children, which is a curious bit of language. That's basically some of the opening language of Genesis 16, where Sarai comes to Abram and tells her that the language that she used makes it, in at least the King James Version, makes it sound like God has withheld, God is holding back. So she's not entertaining the idea that she's infertile or that he's infertile, but that God is holding them back, which makes sense in a universe where God has his hand in everything. But should God have his hand in everything? Aren't we supposed to have free will? And I'm mixing things up. So anyway, so they're well settled, and Abram now is 88 years old. He's an old timer. especially in a time when God says you will live no more than 120 years. He told that to Noah after the flood. So Abram's getting a late start, and Sarai also with the family thing. And on that note, I know that so far we've seen quite a number of people who've lived well past 120, but we'll just let that go. So now, so Sarai comes to Abram, I'm sure I'm nice and sealed, and tells him, you haven't had any kids. She's rather upset about this. Now, we might think, well, what's the big deal? Well, back in that period, family was everything. Talk about family values. Your purpose of marriage was to create a family line, and particularly heirs, and to create someone to take care of the old people in an age before social security and things like that, of course. So they must be getting, Sarai must be getting, and Abram must be getting a little bit worried. They're getting on in years and there's no heirs, but maybe Abram's not so worried because he knows he's got the Lord. He's got a personal relationship with the Lord. But he must be kind of starting to wonder, right? Because God had promised that he would number his descendants as the stars in the sky and in the dust of the earth and the grains of sand. I mean, I'm not pulling those metaphors out of my head. That's specifically the three images that God offered Abram earlier in Genesis, because he's reaffirmed his covenant with Abram 3 times. Once outside of Bethel on the way to Egypt, another time at the same altar that Abram created outside Bethel as they returned out of Egypt, greatly increased in wealth, and then a third time as they approach their current location where they're living. So God has told Abram 3 times, that you're going to have a lot of kids. Now he's 88 years old and no kids. So I wonder if Abram's patience is running out. It sounds like he's pretty doing all right, but he must be starting to wonder, especially since he knows he's got less than 32. There's about 32 years left. He can't live any more than 32 more years. But we're not going to hold God explicitly to these things. These are, well, at least in this particular Bible study, I give a lot of leeway to metaphor and storytelling. Well, not necessarily storytelling, but God, poetic license. That's what I mean. So, but anyway, so Sarai comes to Abram and tells him, we don't have any kids, but I've got an idea. And the idea is this: I've got this slave girl. Her name is Hagar. Love that name, by the way. And she says, why don't you marry Hagar and have children with her, and that will give us an heir. That'll give us some children. Are you going to come over? Oh, I think you're just going to you're going to turn right. That's it. There you go. I'm going to go around this person. That lane turns right as well, so I think they're okay. So Abram, and this is, by the way, this is not an unusual custom. I looked it up a little bit. I'm trying to avoid doing much research, but sometimes things just, they strike me, and I want to learn a little bit more about it. So I looked up this whole thing about, having a second wife or something like that, and it turns out that was a pretty common practice in the patriarchal period, which is a term I learned this morning. I'd never heard of that. That's what that's basically called, this era. This is good because I was struggling to find a term to describe it. In previous videos I was calling it the early century BC or something like that. I'm going to get over here to the carpool lane again and move fast. Today's a fast moving day. Got to catch up on my time so I'm not late for work. Here we go. Now we're up to 80. We'll cruise at 80. Set the cruise control. So in this patriarchal period, that wasn't at all uncommon, like I said before, because having kids and making a family was everything. And there were apparently 4 basic approaches to that. The first was serial monogamy, wherein a man could divorce a woman should she prove infertile, and then marry another one, potentially a fertile young bride. I'm assuming it was probably young. But that had a problem because in that case you'd have to give back the woman's dowry and anything she possessed. So serial monogamy but basically that's kind of what we got now. But we, right in the common era, right? We have serial monogamy. We divorce a woman or a man, but we typically not because they're infertile, but for no cause, and move on. So that's probably the one that's closest to what the state that we live in now, this condition we live in now. The second option was polygamy. So just bring another bride into the household, which would have equal or nearly equal rights as the original bride, and that's is that kind of what's happening in this one? Although Hagar's a slave, so not quite, right? So she's not going to have equal rights. Okay, the third option was to have a concubine, and the concubine would be I guess no, this is the one, right? Because the concubine or a slave to be brought in specifically for the purpose of bearing children, and that is what this one is. This one is not. This is not. Well, but they do. No. It is a mixture, right? Because Abram marries Hagar, so he married her. So concubine you wouldn't have to marry. That means they wouldn't have to provide a dowry, and nor would they probably get any rights. Now there was a fourth one, and I forgot what it was. There was a fourth option in this mix. And no, it didn't involve like King or like Henry VIII, what he did. It was something. All of these were pretty humane things. Well, largely, a lot of them would seem kind of strange to us, and we know about these things from actual contracts from the period, in particular from the Holy Land, and also notably from Assyria, where we actually have contracts that lay out specifically what will happen should someone turn out to not. So a woman, then they usually blamed it on the woman. Should a woman turn out to be not fertile? So I wonder how that always went down. Did they, if they provided 2 or 3 women in series in a row to a man, and they all came up infertile, did they ever get to a point where they said maybe it's not the women, and maybe it's time to provide a second dude? I kind of doubt that. Okay, let me just take a little side note and just comment on what I observed to be patriarchal period family values, and that I believe that these things persisted quite a long time through the Bible. So I'm just going to put a pin in that and note that from the rest of the Bible, that there seems to be an accepted marital contract that is not like what we in the modern era typically consider family values, which are one man, one woman, until death do you part. So I just want to remind myself of that when I hear the debate about family values, that at least from the early perspective of the Torah, that's not a match for what we imagine now. So anyway, so we've talked enough about that. So Sarai has received Abram's agreement that yeah, sure, I'll go in unto Hagar and marry her and see what's happened. I mean, he's clearly a red-blooded Hebrew, right? So that's what happens. And it depends on the version that you read. The King James edition says that Abram goes in unto Hagar, and in the New International Version it says that he slept with her. Also in the New International Version, not in this chapter but in other chapters, you'll read that a man will make love to a woman, which kind of was shocking to me that it used that language. Shocked. I was clutching my pearls. So anyway, by the way, on that note, just a 1 second, I've come into a pattern that I really like, a new way of reading the Bible. whenever I can, I'm trying to read the New International Version first, because I read both NIV and King James. And then after I read the NIV, I then read the King James, and I find that I understand the King James better, because the NIV is written in more familiar, common English, and then the more archaic older English terms of the King James make sense to me. And maybe I'm front-loading my mind with the bias of NIV, but that's okay, because I find that they don't differ too much in terms of their general meaning. They basically are the same thing, although some details are different, place names are different, some things will put a name in, some won't. For the most part, I gotta give it credit that it's basically the same story, but NIV is definitely easier to understand, but King James being the more common one that people seem to reference, I want to know that too. So, okay, gosh, how long have I spent just talking about this part? Here, let's move on. So now Hagar is married to Abram as I guess it's his second wife. Wow, he made it to 88 and never had any other wives. And anyway, so she becomes pregnant, and guess what? As soon as she becomes pregnant, I guess she had a decent relationship with Sarai, Abram's first wife before that. But as soon as she becomes pregnant, realizing she has Abram's child growing in her bosom, in her belly, she starts pulling a little attitude on Sarai, who does not take kindly to this at all. I mean, this must have been hard for Sarai. I mean, to do this, to come to this point, everybody in the camp, I mean, it's a big camp. Back, I think it was a few years before, when Abram went off to defeat the Chedorlaomer. Hey, I remember the name from 2 chapters ago, and almost a week ago. I remembered his name when Abram went off and defeated the host of Chedorlaomer, the foreign invader who took over Sodom, and took Lot and his family captive. When that happened, Abram had 318 servants at that point. Now you must imagine, the servants were encouraged to have families in the biblical era. Largely that was a great way to make sure that your slave stayed your slave. So that must have been, can you imagine, they must have had a small town, right? I mean, more than a small town. There must have been 1,000 at least, and that's just the servants. Imagine he had employees too. We know he didn't have any kids, but still, he must have had a small town, and all the town in Abram and Sarai are the heads of all of that. And there must have been lots of gossip around the washing well. Did you hear what? And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I can't help but putting some caricature to it, because this must have been, if the story is true, this must have been exactly what happened. There's the women around the washing well, and they're saying, Did you hear what happened? Our mistress has given her slave Hagar unto Abram, to be wife no less, and to bear him his children. Oh my gosh! Wow. I mean, this. And of course, this stuff got to Sarai's ears, right? She must have been, deathly just mortified by the whole thing. And it sounds like she's a pretty reasonable woman, for the most part. I mean, she actually was willing to subject herself to this for the benefit of her family. Hold on. Of having a family line, and now Hagar, the slave girl, who was given this honor, so to speak. I mean, keep in mind she was a slave. I know slavery meant something different back in those days, but still, a slave is a slave, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, you're subject to a master, and we're going to learn in just a minute that particular master, Sarai, was not above abusing Hagar, who will run away when that happens. So, and Hagar's probably a lot younger, right? So she's probably as kind of more of a silly girl than anything else. But as soon as she is certainly not as mature as Sarai, of course, right? Just like anything. So she starts pulling the attitude, and then of course Hagar is devastated. I mean, it's like, oh, not only is she forced to capitulate her birth, her her main, back in the day especially, a wife's main function was to provide an heir, right? I hope I'm not speaking out of turn in saying that. I think that was really the case. She was willing to give that up to her slave girl, and her slave girl holds that over her head. Now Hagar can now she can be forgiven for what she does next. She goes to Abram, and she lays it into him. She's like, it's because of you, Abram, that this has happened. Now Abram, she's blaming it all on Abram. And now Abram, he must be like, what? Huh? He's probably taking care of stuff, running over, looking over the flocks, making sure all of his herdsmen are doing their things. He's a busy guy. And Sarai shows up, saying, hey, we need to talk. And she lays this on him. It was her idea. She's the one that literally brought Hagar to Abram and said, go in unto my slave girl, right? That you may have an heir. And now this, and I'm sure maybe that's why he deserves to be a patriarch. He's got the patience of a patriarch. But you can read it. If you read, especially in the King James Version, you can hear it in Abram's voice. He's like, okay, he must have been busy. And he's like, okay, isn't Abram, she's talking to Sarai now, isn't Hagar under your control? Isn't she your slave girl? Do unto her as you see fit. Yeah, now let me get on with my stuff. And he's just kind of dismissing the whole matter at once by authorizing Sarai to handle it as she sees fit. That satisfies Sarai, who, I guess we can still forgive her because she's upset and her, people are talking about her and she must be pained and hurt. And I actually feel for Sarai a little bit, but I feel also for Hagar, who's going through a lot as well. And also she's pregnant, right? That's going to be tough. So Sarai goes back and starts, we don't hear what the details are, but she starts abusing Hagar. We don't know if she's just giving her a tongue lashing or just being mean, or if she's actually physically hurting her. Probably not that. She's actually, carrying their child. Because I forgot to mention, in those old contracts of the patriarchal era, typically the child that's born of the concubine or the slave is recognized as part of the family. So the child that comes will be recognized by everyone as essentially Hagar, the child of Abram and Hagar. So she's got every reason to make sure that Hagar is at least physically safe. But she's not above telling her what she thinks of her. Well, anyway, this greatly we'll come to that in a moment. This greatly upsets Hagar, who runs away. And she's running away, and apparently it's down a pretty well-known road. And we learn the next scene takes place at a well along that road. And it's a well that I guess would have been well known to everybody at the time, because the author of this chapter of Genesis points out that specifically I was on the road to from one place to another place, which maybe it would be like if we took it down back to Los Angeles, it would be like the road from Burbank to Chatsworth. And somewhere along the way there's a stop and there's a well. Now, of course, everybody knew wells back then. That would be like a roadside rest. So I guess if there was a roadside rest, let's say Burbank and Chatsworth, let's say Los Angeles and Las Vegas on Route 15, right? And along the way there's a roadside rest out there by Amboy. Yeah, that's probably exactly how it was. So if we were sitting around the modern campfire, and we would say, so Hagar decided to split, and she grabbed a car and was taken off on Route 15 from LA to Vegas, and she'd pulled over at the roadside rest out there by Amboy. That's exactly how it must have went down when the storytellers were telling this, right? She's on the road from one Middle Eastern city to another, and she stops at the well of whatchamacallit, and the author points out that well is still there, and he'll give its name later. And there she is, stopping for a drink, probably all by herself. How many months pregnant? I don't know. Distraught, running to who knows where. And guess what? Guess who shows up? An angel of the Lord. And I can picture that scene. I can picture this beautiful angel of the Lord arriving. I assume they're beautiful, right? I mean, are there ugly angels? I don't know. I don't know. What would the standard of beauty have been like in that era? It probably wouldn't have been anything like we typically imagine an angel to be, being kind of like a Germanic, Caucasian with a high forehead and in a Roman nose, maybe like that, because that's typically how we view him. It would have been more of like someone from a Palestinian view, right? I mean, someone from that era. So anyway, a very different image in my head. So the angel appears, and the angel says, "What is wrong, Hagar? Why do you cry? Why are you running?" And she tells the angel, and we don't know if she knows. She does. Somehow she'll come to know this is an angel of the Lord. She tells what's going on, how she's running from her master Sarai, who's her mistress Sarai, who's mistreating her. And the angel tells her, "Go back unto your mistress, for you are bearing a child, and that child we will make it. God will make this child as the grains of sand." I mean, we're again with the grains of sand. That's like God's go-to and metaphor for having a lot of offspring. Grains of sand, stars of the sea, dust of the earth, all that stuff. And he promises this unto Hagar, which makes perfect sense because he promised the same thing to Abram, and we know that the child growing within Hagar's womb is a child of Abram's. So anyway, and then he says, "Go back." And before I get on to the next part, let me just put a point in there. So this isn't my first time through the Bible, and I noted at this point that, hey, this is the angel of the Lord telling an abused slave to go back to her master. Where have I seen that before? And I had to rummage around through the later chapters of the Bible in the New Testament to find it, but it was in 1 Peter, where Jesus tells slaves to do the same thing, to obey their master, even the cruel ones. Jesus does not say to escape from or run away from their master. It says to obey them, even the cruel ones. And it goes on to actually list specifically in the Bible what constitutes, what are the limits of cruelty. How badly you can beat your slave and still be a good master. Anyway, we'll save that for later. But it's interesting to note that the angel of the Lord instructing the slave girl to go back to her abusive master is something that Jesus himself will reaffirm in 1 Peter. This is in 1 Peter 12, maybe something. I can't remember specifically which chapter what that was. And it's funny because I looked back through my Bible and I found that I had highlighted that particular section in yellow years ago when I first encountered it. So it struck me at the time as well. So anyway, so he says, go back Hagar. So, and the last thing he says is, you will have a son, and you will name him Ishmael, which apparently means something like striving, for he will strive against all of his fellow mankind, and he will have a hard life and struggle and all this stuff, and it's going to be a tough one. That must not have been very reassuring to Hagar, right? He was like, what? I'm going to have a kid, and he's going up a son, and he's going to fight against everybody, and everybody's going to fight against him. I mean, that must have worried her a little bit, but she doesn't say anything, or at least that's not recounted. And then she goes back, and she will, and I had to linger on that point as well, because I know what's going to happen next, and I know what's going to happen with Sarai, how she's going to become pregnant and have kids, and how and I know what's going to happen with Abram, favoring Ishmael, and how Sarai is going to work in league with her own son to deceive Abram, to basically steal Abram's blessing at the end of Abram's life, to give it unto Sarai's son. I'm getting way ahead of myself. So, but anyway, this is where reading the Bible multiple times really helps, because, I know what's coming, and I can read this now and say, yes, I see what's happening, and the striving with the world and everything. It's all kind of making sense, especially when you get further down and you see how these lines of their sons move out. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. So Hagar goes back to Abram, and Abram Sarai, back to his camp, and she has her child, and Abram names the child Ishmael. Now I don't know if Sarai or if Hagar had a talk with him and said, hey, you ought to call this kid Ishmael, or if it was just a coincidence or inspiration of the Lord or something. But that's what happens. It happens just as the Lord said it would happen. And I'm not a bumpy person, but I usually don't ride in this lane. Let's move over a line. Get over in the carpool lane. Woohoo! That's a bumpy one over there. So they have a kid, and there we go. So Abram's got his heir. All is good. Now there's something else that happens here at the end, and it's like escaped me. He has the kid, and Abram is 80, like 88-ish at the time, and I think that's how the chapter ends. Did I miss anything? No. And like any good serial drama, and I don't mean, again, to be disrespectful in describing of that, but it must have definitely felt that way in the time. If we imagine that this was these stories were originally shared orally, most likely around a campfire on a regular basis, the storyteller would tell it each night to the families around the campfire. That's why the length of these chapters is the perfect length to be told around a campfire, right? You gather all the kids, it's just a little more time before they go to bed, and okay kids, okay everybody gather around, Grandpa's going to tell the story now, continue the story of Abram, and he's going to tell this, and he lets off with it, and then Hagar returned and had the child, and Abram was in his 88th year, although it would have been much better than that. The storytellers of old would have done such a good job, and all the kids would have been, just wrapped around, wow, that's amazing. And now it's like, well, now kids off to bed. All the moms are chiming in. Off you go. No, I want to hear more. What happens next? Nope, save that for tomorrow. And off they go. So it leaves us with a little bit of an uncertainty. What's going to happen next? And we know what's going to happen next. Big things are about to happen next. Wow, and for you men, if you're squeamish, I recommend that you maybe skip tomorrow's Freeway Bible study, because we're going there. We're going there. Yes, adult male circumcision. It's a thing. Well, anyway, let's stop for now. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Have a great day and make it a good life. Take care. Bye bye.